So our next speaker is Dave Dewar from Oxford, was previously Southampton. That's how his music method project. Talk about a number of bars to do with research. So.
Certainly, talking through my R's. Thank you very much. Interestingly, this relates in quite a deep way to the previous talk. We'll discuss how in the bar later. Also, I arrived rather late today, unfortunately, but walked in at the back just as the speaker was saying computer sciences in Southampton burning down. I remember that very well, and a couple of other people in the room. If you want to know about disaster management and you'd like some stories, then again, the pub, you have to buy us a lot of drink before we get to those stories. Right, yes, I'm going to talk about reconstructible research. I'm trying to provoke some thoughts here, really, about the research record, which are two words beginning with R. And even as I say that, I realise this is going to be yet another talk by me with ambiguity in words like record and instrument and scale, but there we go. This using information retrieval community, which is represented by many in the room, is, I think, fantastic in many, many ways. I mean, I've been working with it since the 1990s, but also in my role in Oxford, for example, I'm looking after a multidisciplinary research centre with about 60 people in lots of different disciplines. So I get this sort of overview of different areas. And there's lots of really, really interesting things about this community. Let me just flag some of that. So for those of you familiar with Mirex, this is partly oriented around that. So this is a community that has data, all these digital music collections. Interestingly, can't freely copy it, but you might have some local copies, and if you do, you can figure out if they're the same as someone else's. I'm not sure what other domains have those properties. That's interesting from a data viewpoint. We have this notion of quotes ground, quotes truth, which is a temporary social construct for the purposes of evaluation. We can debate in the pub. We have a lot of expertise. I came to Izmir here in Queen Mary a few years ago at a time when the UK science programme was desperately trying to get people to do multidisciplinary research. And I walked into a room very close to here, and it was absolutely buzzing with computer scientists, signal processing, mathematicians, digital librarians, just the whole musicologists, the whole piece. It was absolutely amazing. So that's fantastic. And there's software that's being shared to do this stuff, which is of course important for today's discussions. And people do things and their results, and those are shared, and that's all part of what we publish in conferences like Izmir. And there's a notion of evaluation, this whole annual Mirex, not a competition, game of league tables of the performance of the different algorithms and so on, all held together by this amazing socio-technical infrastructure. So not every discipline or every area of research has all those things. One of the, some have others and some have some, but this is a really, really interesting and flourishing set of sort of practices within this community. Just to sort of make that a bit more concrete, let's just choose one project. For example, the Salami project, best acronym ever, structural analysis of large amounts of music information. Some people involved in that are in the room. And in that project we take music, we use some tools, some software there. That seems to be something from Queen Mary called Sonic Visualizer. Here we had students, music students in McGill and in Southampton, annotating the structure of the music, and then from that we interpret the structure in some higher level representation, and then we represent that in against an ontology, which is being designed by people in the room. And then we also ran algorithms over the original data to do some autocorrelation stuff, and from that deduce structure. And people do this every year in Mirex, and there are the league tables. Point is, every one of those is an artifact. It's a digital artifact of this research process. And if you wanted to capture the experiment that is one of those runs, it would be an assembly of those artifacts. So this is my first point, that we're dealing with assemblies of stuff, right? Then what we use there, the apparatus for that experiment, the test tubes and rubber pipes and Bunsen burners, if you like, is software. And this is just, you can't really read this very well, but this is a recent survey, again by people in the room, of some of the software toolkits people are using. Now we don't have a universal set of sizes of rubber tubes and test tubes and Bunsen burners with which people can assemble the apparatus. We have lots of different packages of software that people use in different ways and different parts of them and interwork them in different ways. And that's not wrong, because each one of those is coming out the box suitable for some area of work. They have co-evolved, and this isn't a process of designing software to which a set of established user requirements. It's a process of co-evolution between the users and the creators of the software over a period of time. And this is characteristic of software, as you'll all recognise. But the point is, this is the apparatus for the experiments. Here's a nice example of the apparatus that's used in Murex, for example. These are workflows. This is the Meander workflow system. Each one of those nodes, those boxes, is a data processing stage. And this sort of captures that idea that some people here are innovating in bits inside those boxes, but also it's the assembly of the boxes that's part of the experiment, part of the apparatus that people are doing. So there's, again, this notion of assembly. Before, the assembly of the artifacts for the experiment. Here, the assembly of the components of the software or the components in the workflow in order to create the apparatus, which we can think of, if you like, as a kind of it's like telescopes in astronomy. Telescopes have improved over the years. We can see some pictures here. But like music information retrieval, what they do is take us from signal, some noisy signal from the real world, through to some understanding. And that process of sort of the instrument design and improvement is also part of all of this. The point being that artifact, the assembly that makes the workflow, the assembly of the software components, is itself a thing that we can define and share and reuse, and adds capability to the community and adds something to the research record. So I've got two assemblies now. I've got the assembly that makes the experiment and the assembly that makes the instrument. The instrument being one of the ambiguous words. And this is just a moment at the end of the first part of this talk for me to do one of my rants, which is that the world, strangely, just now seems to have discovered data. I mean, some of us have been using it for years, but universities are suddenly coming up with all sorts of data policies because they're obliged to do so. There's lots of studies of data sharing in different communities, all the issues to do with licensing, governance, and so on. But if that's half the story, what we've just seen wasn't about data. Data is really important. Some of those bits were data, but we just saw a load of other stuff. It's what you do with it. Okay. So if everyone's very proud of their big data, say to them, it's not how big it is, it's what you do with it. Right? Because it's those methods, it's those processing steps, it's those analytic steps, it's those artifacts which we can then share, which enable other people to do stuff with their data. Okay, it's those instruments, it's that apparatus. Right, second part of the talk. We have some experience of some of this stuff. So over the years, we've been working with these workflow systems. So there are lots of different scientific workflow systems out there. Here are some of them. Meander's already mentioned. Taverna's in bioinformatics. Some of these are in business. Some of these are in signal processing. Some of these are in environment. These artifacts, following what I just said, are usefully shared because it enables someone to repeat someone else's work. It enables people to share know-how and to share sort of expertise and to help people learn and build capacity in doing these things. So 4 years ago we created a website so that people could share these scientific workflows. It's called My Experiment. One of the figures on this is wrong because there's now another one of these things called PAX, which I'm about to talk about, which is this talk, which you can now find on My Experiment in PAC 273. This is kind of Facebook for scientists, but we learned that was a bad way of describing it, so it's not Facebook for scientists. Rather than sharing data, this is about what you do with it. It's about those workflows, those analysis pipelines. It is very interesting to look at how people use it, and different communities, different disciplines have different behaviours in how they share stuff. If anyone wants to use it, the site's there. There's also source code. It's got a nice Sparkle interface for the linked data people in the audience, and it's inspired a number of other, or influenced a number of other projects. So this website has taught us a lot. It's that coevolution thing again. Users are using it, we're watching what they're doing, things evolve. It's the perpetual beta. This is what the site looks like. I just want to flag two things. This strip of social metadata partly relates to the previous talk. I mean, a lot of people are involved in producing these things. There's credit, there's attribution, this is all about reputation. Different people have different roles. When you do a piece of research these days, it's more like a Hollywood cast of different people, including the gaffer and everyone who appears at the end and did the catering and everything. Maybe that's what we should have on our papers rather than this artificial notion of co-authors. So there's that very important piece there, the social metadata. But for the purpose of this talk, this notion of PAX is very interesting because very, very early on, our users were requesting the ability to attach other stuff to their workflows, PowerPoint slides, PDFs, data, example input and output data, so you can check the workflow does the same thing tomorrow, or in 100 years, or 100 nanoseconds. All these things cause change. And that was a coevolutionary piece again. We didn't tell people what to group together, what to aggregate, what to assemble. We let people do what they wanted, and then we had a look. And here's an example. This is actually not a music example. This is a trypanosomiasis example, which is sleeping sickness in cattle. But it's a typical, it's our sort of poster child example of a bioinformatician wanting to assemble not just having a workflow by itself, but a workflow and another workflow he also used, and the PTS and the slides and the results and the provenance logs and all the different pieces there, with which you can reconstruct that experiment at a later date. We've done studies of this since. Here's a nice some visualizations of Sean in the audience who use these Sparkle queries. If anyone wants to go away and analyze the content of my experiment, it's very easy. You see, we've seen all different kinds of things assembled in packs, and we've classified them, and we've reflected on this. There's a nice R-word reflection. And back in a blog post in, I can't remember what year it was, 2 or 3 years ago, we classified some of these R words that describe the behaviours of the packs, of the research objects. And then this relates to the first part of the talk, because these are, in practice, the digital artifacts, the assemblies, the aggregations that people are sharing in digital research to drop into the tooling of digital research to do things like using information retrieval work. So these things are reusable, as we discussed. They're repurposable. You can look inside them and see how things work and borrow bits. You can repeat the experiments. We can reproduce. So someone else can take one of these and do it. I'm going to say some more about that in a second. You might want to replay because these things can occur in microseconds or in hundreds of years, and you want to focus on one part of it. It's part of the nature of digital research. You need to be able to cite them for all the reasons we know. They need to be transparent in various ways, and they need to have credit and attribution, as we've discussed. And there are loads more of these R words, actually. In a recent blog post, there are even more. You can repair them, and gosh, I have to look it up to find out all the other words. So, the idea then of the workflows and the repeat and the reproducibility, I just want to say something about, because there's actually quite a lot of hot debate about this, and interestingly, some of it comes out of part of the origins of this community. It's the signal processing world, and I'm going to try and clear up a little bit of that if I can. So, if you're a scientist and you've been taught to do your physics labs in your undergraduate degree, for example, one of the things you learn is you can repeat your experiment there in the lab, and then you can make some record of that in your logbook and publish it or whatever, and someone else can come along and they might, based on the research record, then try to reproduce that experiment, third party in their own lab, and they might do some repeats as part of that, but that's the very clear notion of the difference between a repeat and a reproduce, and the experiment design, this is what you're taught. However, there's another school of thought or vocabulary on this, which comes from the quotes reproducible research world, which is much more focused around this piece of software producing the same numbers sometime later, right? And these don't entirely sit comfortably together. And I want to sort of try and clear that up a bit. So what's happening here is that you're running some software. This is in silico research, like those workflows and things that we saw. You produce your paper, and you also make the software available. Maybe you make it open source, you make the binaries available, maybe you make a virtual machine image available so someone can do that again. And then a third party comes along. What have they now done? Have they reproduced, or did they repeat? Because the notion of repeat is what you do with the same piece of kit. And exporting that software or that virtual image was pretty much like exporting a piece of equipment from my lab so you can run it in your lab, right? That's different to reproduce, or is it? You can debate that. I think my point is it doesn't matter. Because what you're doing in all these cases is that other word that I use in the title of the talk, and I've used once as I've been presenting, which is reconstruct. As I walk along the corridors of my research centre, people are reconstructing research from software, from papers. When you've reconstructed, you might want to repeat or reuse, replicate, whatever. But a lot of this is about the reconstruct piece. Incidentally, if we just put the pseudocode of an algorithm in a paper and someone went away and recoded that in software themselves, that's probably more of a reproduce, one for the pub. This is what we've actually been discussing. Workflows, they run over workflow enactment engines, that's software. So we've got kind of 3 artifacts in there now. We've got the workflow, we've got the software, and the research and then it depends what you're doing and what you want to call it, and that's why it's a bit complicated and people are having lots of arguments about this. But I think the useful notion here is reconstruct. I think if we can reconstruct an experiment or the apparatus, then that's useful for doing any of these things. So that's message number 1 or 2 from this talk. Right. Whatever it is you want to do, you want to reconstruct. Now the next and final point is, how do we do that? What is the research record that enables us to reconstruct research? And there's been a lot of debate about these things in the last couple of years. Here's just a sequence of events that were held last year beyond the PDF and the Elsevier Executable Paper Grant Challenge, Force 11, which is Future Research Communication, a Microsoft Research event last December. Lots of debate about the scholarly record, the nature of scholarly discourse, the nature of the research record. So this is a hot topic, and in a way I see this community, as we've discussed it, as really an exemplar to apply some of these ideas. And the answer probably isn't the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in paper circa 350 years ago, or even this form of it from a couple of years ago, which is the PDF version of SAME. But instead it's perhaps these. Oh look, a plug for the Journal of Open Research Software, which is partly to do with the Software Sustainability Institute, as you'll recognise the logo there. This is much more about making the software available as an artifact that's a first-class citizen in the research record that is properly maintained and respected. Another one here is the source code for biology and medicine. There was another which Cameron, I don't know if he mentioned it this morning, was responsible for, called Open Research Computation as well, which fitted in a different niche within the scholarly publishing ecosystem. So we're beginning to see software turned into part of the research record. That's part of this reconstruct that I've been talking about. And if I were giving you a full 1 hour talk instead of the 15 minutes, I would talk a lot more about the other aspects of the record, in particular executability of things. But then just to sort of flag something that's now hard. So this is a digitised piece of Victorian parlour music from the Bodleian Library in Oxford. We're crowdsourcing the transcription of these, the cover metadata, but also the music. There's a project called What's the Score at the Bodleian. Google What's the Score at the Bodleian, not just What's the Score, because otherwise you get football. This is now the latest project in the Galaxy Zoo sort of family, the Zooniverse family of citizen science, citizen scholarship projects. So a bunch of citizens now are part of the research. They are collaborators. They are researchers in this. I don't know how we reconstruct, reproduce, or repeat that experiment. So that's a sort of closing thought. So what the take-homes are is that an experiment itself is an assembly of artifacts. We want to reconstruct. The software is, as we all know, this is all quite hard because the world is changing all the time. Things that work now might do something different later, as we all know. So what is the research record? Well, incidentally, part of the answer might be descriptions of things and part of the answer might be things. I mean, is it a zip file of the software or is it a pointer to the software? And I call this the web-particle duality. I mean, sometimes people mean one and sometimes they mean the other. And then finally, the idea that if we had digital research objects for all those things that we've been talking about, all those Murex experiments, all those Izmir papers had a digital form where someone can easily re-execute them, well, the machine can re-execute them as well. So new data comes along and analysis occurs automatically and a paper pops out the other end. We've got a paper factory. That's nice. Don't know who owns the intellectual property. Perhaps we can discuss that one in the pub as well. But it's taking us into a much more automated world, and there's a whole set of issues around there as well. So as you hear people talking about why data sharing is so important, remind them that software sharing is important too. This room knows that, but so are the experiments, so are those, so is the apparatus, so are the experiments that we do that we want to reconstruct. And all this stuff isn't just for humans. Computers are users as well. Thank you.